If you were to change one thing about the Philippine history, what would you change?
The colonizations, sana hindi na tayo na-colonize. Sana hindi na tayo na-colonize. Sana hindi na tayo na-colonize.
Yung mga lolo natin, and one day, they found ourselves, our fathers, looking, may mga puti, nag-a-announce na kanila ito and we have to pay our due and respect to the kingdom of Spain. And they enjoy the fat of the land.
It seems to me that the future of the Philippines, and for that matter the Asia Pacific, will always have to involve the United States. It seems to me that the future of the Philippines, and for that matter the Asia Pacific, will always have to involve the United States. It seems to me that the future of the Philippines, and for that matter the Asia Pacific, will always have to involve the United States.
The Spanish want to surrender, but they don't want to surrender to the Filipinos. The Spanish want to surrender, but they don't want to surrender to the Filipinos. The Spanish want to surrender, but they don't want to surrender to the Filipinos. They're worried about a massacre. And so they negotiate secretly with General Ewell Otis, who is the commander of the Americans, and arrange for what can only be described as a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. On August 13th, 1898, the American troops attack Manila. And after about half a day's fairly sustained resistance to uphold their honor, the Spanish garrison in Manila surrenders to the U.S. and is promptly, over the next several months, loaded up onto ships and shipped home. The Filipinos are not told of this. They are not allowed to come into the city of Manila after the Americans capture it. And so you get this weird switch in August. The Spanish disappear from the equation, and now it's the Americans holding Manila Bay and Manila, and the Filipinos holding everything else. The Americans holding Manila Bay and Manila, and the Filipinos holding everything else. And the Filipinos holding everything else. And the Filipinos holding everything else. And nobody's sure what to do, because McKinley is still dithering back home in the U.S. He finally decides to send a negotiation, a group to negotiate an end to the Spanish war with Spain. But he still hasn't decided what to ask for when they leave the U.S. He literally sends them over to Paris to negotiate with Spanish and says, I'll tell you what to do about the Philippines later. One of the negotiators gets a sense of how much of a shock this has been for the rest of the world, that the U.S. has swept the Spanish out of the way this much. He's sitting at a dinner party, and he's next to a beautiful young woman in a sort of spectacular ball gown, and he's sort of being avuncular and flirting with her and so on. And she's the daughter of the German ambassador, and she says to him, I was against you in your war. I was on the side of the little dog. Whatever his faults, at any rate, I wish he had taken a good bite out of you. He got up and went off to have a cigar with the rest of the men. But finally, McKinley decides to take the Philippines. He buys it from Spain for $20 million. Purchases it from Spain for $20 million. And when news breaks of this in January of 1899, the Filipinos are shocked. Aguinaldo says the conscience of man may pronounce its infallible verdict as to who are the true oppressors of nations and the tormentors of humankind. The conscience of man may pronounce its infallible verdict as to who are the true oppressors of nations and the tormentors of humankind.
You know, we use a hashtag at the U.S. Embassy, Friends, Partners, Allies. Friends, Partners, Allies. Friends, Partners, Allies.
The American conquest of the Philippines occurred throughout 1900 as American troops gradually defeated the Philippine Army. Remnants of this army continued to fight as guerrillas in rural areas, while the U.S. Army deployed over 70,000 troops to occupy and run this new American colony. This agitated some locals, while drunken American soldiers often provoked incidents, especially in pursuit of local women. This led to armed attacks on American occupiers. The well-trained and better-equipped American soldiers rarely had trouble dealing with local insurgents, but in several cases, large groups of Filipinos inflicted heavy casualties. This resulted in negative newspaper stories back home, since uprisings did not match rhetoric that Filipinos had been liberated. Attacks angered American generals, who implemented genocide tactics used back home against Indian tribes. Army Brigadier General Samuel Young advocated the use of, quote, remedial measures that proved successful with the Apaches, end quote. The basic strategy was to concentrate the population in towns and camps, hence the term concentration camp. This was done in the Philippines. Then soldiers roamed the countryside or traveled aboard boats to burn houses and food stocks, destroy fishing boats, and shoot farm animals and defiant villagers who refused to live in the camps. In the town of Balangig, all Filipino men were required to stay in 2 large tents after sundown and didn't appreciate this imprisonment. On September 28, 1901, while most of the 74 American soldiers were eating breakfast, women smuggled them large bolo knives. Hundreds suddenly attacked the American soldiers, resulting in 54 dead and 18 wounded, while survivors fled. This infuriated American generals and resulted in punitive expeditions and a reign of terror. U.S. Army General Jacob Smith issued his famous Circular No. 6, which stated his plans for crushing all resistance on the island of Samar. Quote, I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn, and the more you burn and kill, the better it will please me. He tasked his men to reduce the large island of Samar into a howling wilderness, and to kill all males older than 10 years. Leonard F. Adams of the 1st Washington Volunteers wrote home after seeing the results, quote, there were 1,008 dead niggers and a great many wounded. We burned all their houses. I don't know how many men, women, and children the Tennessee boys did kill. They would not take any prisoners. One company of Tennessee boys was sent to headquarters with 30 prisoners and got there with about 100 chickens and no prisoners, end quote. Army Brigadier General Franklin Bell told the press, quote, I can't say how long it will take us to make a wilderness of that country, but it will eventually take place, end quote. From January to April 1902, Bell launched 44 expeditions to shoot or burn anything of value. Just one expedition destroyed 500 tons of rice and corn, hundreds of hogs and chickens, 6,000 houses, 200 oxen, 800 cattle, and 680 horses. U.S. military forays descended into a series of atrocities that included the torture and massacre of civilians and the burning of entire villages. American soldiers often employed water torture to gather information and tortured those most likely to know details, like the local mayor, police chief, and priest. The exact number of civilians massacred by U.S. troops will never be known, but Filipino historians believe it was around 50,000 killed from 1900 to 1902. A much larger number died from the resulting famine and disease. An influential newspaper, the San Francisco Argonaut, supported this effort and explained, quote, We do not want the Filipinos. We want the Philippines. The islands are enormously rich, but unfortunately they are infested with Filipinos." End quote. Hundreds of Filipinos were publicly lynched by the U.S. Army. Many American soldiers disapproved, and at least 20 deserted. 6 black deserters fought alongside the insurgents. 2 were captured and hanged by the Army. News stories about these atrocities upset the American public and most politicians. On April 15, 1902, Secretary of War Elihu Root sent orders to relieve some Army officers of duty and to court-martial General Jacob Smith. He stated that President Theodore Roosevelt, quote, "intends to see that the most rigorous care is exercised to detect and prevent any cruelty or brutality, and that men who are guilty thereof are punished." End quote. General Smith, who had been court-martialed 3 times during his career and had ordered the killing of every male over age 10, was found guilty and forced to retire. A few junior Army officers received minor administrative punishment. The Army ended its reign of terror and was surprised when frictions with the locals quickly disappeared and insurgent attacks became rare. Guilty generals remained untouched. Adna Shafee had spent 30 years fighting Indians in the American West. He had risen to the rank of Major General and became military governor of the Philippines. Shafee had told his officers that it was his intention to, quote, "give the Filipinos bayonet rule for years to come." His orders were largely responsible for these atrocities, yet he was promoted and served as Chief of Staff of the Army from 1904 to 1906. Brigadier General Robert Hughes, U.S. Commander in Manila, was promoted on return to the States and appeared before a Senate committee in 1902 to explain why American soldiers killed women and children. He told the senators, quote, "the women and children are part of the family, and where, if you wish to inflict punishment, you can punish the man probably worse in that way than any other." End quote. When asked if this violated the rules of a civilized society, Hughes replied, quote, "these people are not civilized."
Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies.
Filipinos defended the American cause in World War II, principally because in 1935, the Americans had promised us independence. Also because we tended to look down. And in this respect, we had the American point of view upon the Japanese, as well as any other Asian country. The Japanese did not evoke a lot of pride in Asia here in the Philippines because when we started the revolution against Spain, we went to a Japanese boat here and asked for Japanese help against Spain, and we were refused.
Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies.
The United States wanted bases in 1935. Our Congress turned it down and said, no, these bases make a farce of our independence, or words to that effect. And so Quezon, who was then the president, went to see Roosevelt. And he got and brought back a bill called the Tidings-McDuffie Act, which eliminated all of those bases, left only naval refueling stations, and only for 2 years, and required the U.S. president to declare the Philippines and get the treaty declaring it a neutral zone, that is, one that could not be taken by any one of the countries. Okay. So far, in 1935, so good. The Americans granted us independence basically because we were becoming a pain in the neck to American business, principally because our sugar was competing with Hawaiian sugar. So the American government decided to give us independence. Okay, then came the war, World War II. At the end of World War II, when there was no longer any enemy to speak of, American government insisted upon the bases. And that is how they got their bases here. They made it a condition of our independence.
Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies.
You haven't exactly paid for what we lost in the last war, if we must make an accounting. 75% of our cities were devastated in the last war. We lost 1 million men. 75% of our cities were devastated in the last war. We lost 1 million men. 75% of our cities were devastated in the last war. We lost 1 million men. 75% of our cities were devastated in the last war. We lost 1 million men.
Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies. And
would you admit that because of the dependence of the armed forces upon the military assistance of the United States under the existing bases agreement, about I think 67% of all of its materials and equipments had been drawn from the United States under the form of FMS, FMF now, all right? You are more knowledgeable.
Yes, Your Honor. FMS, we borrow the money from America, Your Honor, and we buy also the guns and the equipment from America. But if we can borrow money outside, we can buy maybe equipment from other countries less expensive than what they are in America. Given the nature of our own need, Your Honor. Now, if you talk of grants in aid, I'll tell you, Your Honor, the only time that the Americans started giving us grants for military purposes was in 1980. No, the only time that the Americans started giving us grants for military purposes was in 1980. From 1979 all the way to 1951, they were not giving us any grants in aid except what they want to give us every now and then. Yes. And then from 51 backwards, that was the time when the height of the operation of the military assistance agreement. And even in those years, Your Honor, they were in arrears in their deliveries to us of what we needed from them and what we requested from them. And yet, in that treaty, by the way, that military assistance agreement, they committed to modernize the armed forces of the Philippines. But we were not modernized.
Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies.
We were not modernized.
Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies.
We were not modernized as a military organization. The weapons of the American soldiery was not made available as a weapon for the Philippine soldiery.
But I did recall that it was you who said that sometime in 1979, the Philippines unilaterally abrogated the military assistance agreement.
No, we did not. We were not the ones who abrogated it, Your Honor. The Americans discontinued.
Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies.
Over the years, I have seen that the foreign policy of the Philippines always tailored that of the United States. And over the years, I have seen that the foreign policy of the Philippines always tailored that of the United States. And over the years, I have seen that the foreign policy of the Philippines always tailored that of the United States.
Well, the Assistant Secretary for East Asia Affairs at the U.S. State Department, Kurt Campbell, came to my office expressing their concern that the tensions in the South China Sea, especially in Scarborough Shoal, were growing so strong because of that standoff. If you recall, at that time, that was April 2012, there were about 77 Chinese vessels, all in all, facing around 8 Filipino vessels. We only had one fairly large vessel, which was I believe it was the BRP Ramon Alcaraz, which was sent to check on Chinese fishing vessels that were harvesting giant clams. They were actually blocked by Chinese Coast Guard ships, and that is why the officials of the BRP Ramon Alcaraz were not able to board the Chinese fishing vessels. So at that time, the numbers were just very much against us. They had 5 large vessels. We had one. We had one Bureau of Fisheries, not even as large as the BRP Ramon Alcaraz. It was probably half the size, and the rest were fishing vessels. So Kurt Campbell said, Ambassador, I think it's best if the Philippines withdraws its ships from Scarborough Shoal. And I said, I cannot make that recommendation. What I would suggest is a simultaneous withdrawal of the ships. So he said he was going to go back to talk to the Chinese ambassador, Zhang Yesui, and see if they would agree to it. So he came back to me and he said that they had agreed. So, okay, we decided to suggest a specific day and a time that there would be a simultaneous withdrawals of the ships, both from the Philippines and the U.S. So with that agreement, I went to Secretary De Rosario and made the recommendation, who in turn went to President Noynoy Aquino to recommend that we have a simultaneous withdrawal of ships. Of course, at that time, President Aquino raised also the question, what happens if the Chinese will? He said, well, of course, we cannot be sure. We have no guarantees, but
Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies. Friends, partners, allies.
of course, at that time, President Aquino raised also the question, what happens if the Chinese will? He said, well, of course, we cannot be sure. We have no guarantees, but of course, at that time, President Aquino raised also the question, what happens if the Chinese will? He said, well, of course, we cannot be sure. We have no guarantees, but
we do not have any rights to these sites. It's not as if somehow somebody snaps a finger and all of a sudden everything is open to the United States. Everything that we do in the Philippines is at the invitation of the Philippine government.
In Article 6 of the agreement of EDCA, it speaks mostly of prepositioning. And prepositioning, I take to mean, is simply the forward positioning of material so that when there is a deployment in that part of the world, that this material need not come from a distance far away in the United States. I am reminded of the prepositioned material that you see in a place like Hawaii, where there are acres and acres of military equipment just waiting to be deployed should there be a need. And furthermore, it is in paragraph 3 of Article 4, it reads, the prepositioned material of United States force shall be for the exclusive use of the United States force, and full title, such equipment, supplies, and material remains with the United States. The United States will have control over the access to and disposition of such prepositioned material, and shall have the unencumbered right to remove such prepositioned material at any time from the territory of the Philippines. This is implying that this prepositioned material in the Philippines agreed locations is for war.
These are not U.S. bases.
And the prepositioning of this material will be clearly for the use only of United States forces. Surely that implies that this is now a U.S. base.
These are not U.S. bases.
That this is now a U.S. base.
These are not U.S. bases.
That this is now a U.S. base.
These are not U.S. bases.
This month, we've had two announcements about the U.S. being able to have 4 new bases in the Philippines.
These are not U.S. bases.
The U.S. being able to have 4 new bases in the Philippines.
These are not U.S. bases.
The U.S. being able to have 4 new bases in the Philippines, as well as now some new rotational agreements with Japan. Again, Admiral, maybe you could just describe how that sort of fits into, what the discussion this morning.
Sure. So the Philippines is the key. The Philippines is the key. The Philippines is the key. I mean, they're at the point of the spear. They're at the point of the spear. They're at the point of the spear in the South China Sea. It's hard to imagine a fight with the PRC without being able to use bases on the Philippines.
It's not about China.
It's hard to imagine a fight with the PRC without being able to use bases on the Philippines.
It's not about China.
It's hard to imagine a fight with the PRC without being able to use bases on the Philippines.
It's not about China.
You see, the United States needs an enemy because the enemy is what justifies its largest manufacturing sector, military spending. So without an enemy, you can't justify the tremendous resources that Washington puts into military spending. Now it's China. Several developments contributed to changing the enemy to China. One was China's growing willingness to stand up to Washington's provocations and to speak back. One was Washington's need for someone to blame for America's large trade deficit. Washington was not about to blame the powerful global corporations, so it chose China.
The Philippines is the key. The Philippines is the key. I mean, they're at the point of the spear. They're at the point of the spear. They're at the point of the spear in the South China Sea. It's hard to imagine a fight with the PRC without being able to use bases on the Philippines.
This is a strategy-driven budget and one driven by the seriousness of our strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. This budget will help us continue to implement our 2022 National Defense Strategy and the President's National Security Strategy.
In order to protect the American people, readiness now and readiness in the future through modernization is our #1 priority, and there is no other #1. Right now, the international system is under stress. For the first time in our nation's history, the United States is facing 2 major nuclear powers whose vital national security interests are in competition with the United States. Both the People's Republic of China and Russia have the means to threaten our interests and our way of life. But war with Russia or China is neither inevitable nor imminent. This budget sustains our current readiness and adapts the joint force to the future warfighting requirements. This is a matter of significant national security importance, and we must act with clear-eyed urgency. By doing so, no adversary should ever underestimate the resolve of our nation and the strength of our military. Preparation for war and deterring war is extraordinarily expensive, but it's not as expensive as fighting a war. And this budget prevents war and prepares us to fight it if necessary.
We like war. We're a warlike people. We like war because we're good at it. And you know why we're good at it? Because we get a lot of practice. This country's only 200 years old, and already we've had 10 major wars. We average a major war every 20 years in this country, so we're good at it. And it's a good thing we are. We're not very good at anything else anymore. Huh? Can't build a decent car. Can't make a TV set or a VCR worth a fuck. Got no steel industry left. Can't educate our young people. Can't get health care to our old people. But we can bomb the shit out of your country, all right? Huh? We can bomb the shit out of your country, all right? Especially if your country is full of brown people. Oh, we like that, don't we? That's our hobby. That's our new job in the world, bombing brown people. Iraq, Panama, Grenada, Libya, you got some brown people in your country. Tell them to watch the fuck out, or we'll goddamn bomb them. Well, when's the last white people you can remember that we bombed? Can you remember the last white? Can you remember any white people we've ever bombed? The Germans, those are the only ones, and that's only because they were trying to cut in on our action. They wanted to dominate the world. Bullshit, that's our fucking job. That's our fucking job. Now we only bomb brown people. Not because they're trying to cut in on our action, just because they're brown. Now, you probably noticed I don't feel about that war the way we were told we were supposed to feel about that war, the way we were ordered and instructed by the United States government to feel about that war. You see, I tell you, my mind doesn't work that way. I got this real moron thing I do. It's called thinking. And I'm not a very good American because I like to form my own opinions. I don't just roll over when I'm told to.
September 16, 1991, may well be the day when we in this Senate found the soul, the true spirit of this nation, because we mustered the courage and the will to declare the end of foreign military presence in the Philippines and help pave the way to lasting peace here and in the world. Blessed are the peacemakers, our Lord said in his deathless Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Therefore, I vote no to this treaty, and if it were only possible, I would vote 203 million times no. I also vote a resounding yes to the resolution of non-concurrence. Salamat po at mabuhay ang bansang Pilipinas. Thank you, Mr. President.
It seems to me that the future of the Philippines, and for that matter the Asia Pacific, will always have to involve the United States.
Para kayong mga birhen na naniniwala sa pag-ibig na isang puta!